last 12 years or so, how we consume information and how we communicate has dramatically changed. When you think about it's really only been 12 years since social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube really started to take off and take root in our society. It's kind of mind-boggling, but those platforms have changed how we discuss issues, how we communicate with each other, how we stay in touch with one another, how the news is disseminated and reported, frankly. So, this has been a big disruption in our society, and it's brought both good and bad. So this week there's been a lot of discussion, a lot in the media, about what the role of social media platforms are in terms of quote-unquote fact-checking or censoring information. And I wanted to give you some thoughts on this and then ask for your feedback. So certainly social media, especially I would say a platform like Twitter, is rampant with threats of violence, racism, and hate speech, libel. It's not a great place to be. And on other social media platforms, they have these problems too. They're not immune to it. And I think it's really important that we have laws that exist to protect people against those things, are proven in courts to extend to social media. And that has been the case. There's been many instances of libel on social media that have been proven in a court. I myself have had to go to court over an issue of criminal harassment on Twitter. And so we do have to have laws that protect people. And certainly the other thing is that, threats of violence, be it if they're made in person, on a piece of paper, or on social media, they shouldn't be tolerated. We have laws to prevent those things, and we shouldn't be inciting violence. I think everybody has a shared responsibility to ensure that. And many social media platforms, they do have tools for users to deal with abuse, right? Or to curate, abusive content against their content. So for example, every social media platform has some form of block or mute or ban. And it's up to each and every user to determine how they use those tools. That's why they exist, to prevent or to allow that user to use those platforms as they see fit. So when you look at the fact that those tools exist, that we have laws to address things like criminal harassment, hate speech, libel. Those are all really important things that I think we need to discuss more and, frankly, use more. I know that it's one thing for me to say, for example, that I went to court on an issue of criminal harassment, but what about somebody who isn't in my position of privilege and power? How do we make sure that they have equal access to ensure that they're not subject to these things? But here's where things get tricky. Is it the role of social media platforms to proactively fact check or remove content based on their definition of the truth? So for those of you who have seen on my page here, I actually had a representative from YouTube Canada, who's actually a really nice guy, come before our Industry Canada Committee, and I kind of asked him some questions in that regard, because right now YouTube, I believe it's their terms of service or their community guidelines, it states that they don't allow content that spreads medical misinformation that contradicts the World Health Organization or local health authorities about COVID-19. So I asked him questions about, when the WHO posted a tweet saying essentially that there was no human-to-human transmission of COVID, would they have deemed that misinformation? Or if somebody had put a video on YouTube saying, well, it kind of seems like there's human-to-human transmission of this, maybe we should be looking into this, would they have removed that content simply because they questioned the World Health Organization? Or if you think about in Canada, our Liberal government was saying for weeks that border measures don't work, that they don't work. So if somebody had posted a video saying, well, maybe we should be questioning whether or not border control measures actually work in preventing the spread of COVID-19, would they have removed that video? And in that situation, we have to ask, what is the liability of an organization like that when they're removing, both from a free speech perspective, but also they're determining that the WHO or a local health authority has the truth, when in fact the situation is rapidly changing. So I think we need to ask a lot of questions about that. The second thing that we need to talk about is, are these rules consistently applied? Again, I want to stress this particular point. Nobody should be making threats of violence on social media. If that's something that you think is acceptable, don't do it. I don't care what partisan tirade you're on. If you're conservative, liberal, you shouldn't be threatening violence or suggesting violence against another person, no matter how much you dislike them or like them or whatever. And you'll notice that it's a constant battle to keep up on my Facebook page, but when we see threats of violence, doesn't matter what the partisan stripe is, we report them. When appropriate, we report them to local authorities, because nobody should be doing that. And it's incumbent upon leaders to not do that. That's bad. But I'm just looking at a tweet here. It's from the leader of Iran. And I won't read the country that he said this about, because I don't want to propagate this, but it was a tweet that was put out in June, it looks like, June or March of 2018, and it suggests that a certain country should be removed and eradicated. So that tweet has stood for 2 years plus, well, about 2 years. It was retweeted 5,600 times and had 10,000 likes. So I would just say that if social media platforms are going to take it upon themselves to be proactively censoring threats of violence, then they really need to think about how big that task is, because there's a lot of trolls and there's a lot of world leaders that do that on a regular basis. Now, the world would be a better place if we didn't see things like that. But what liability and what responsibility are social media platforms opening themselves up to when they're undertaking this? I'm curious about that as a legislator. I'd like to understand that. I think that that's important. The other thing, I think it's more clear-cut to talk about removing posts that threaten violence. I don't think there should be any argument on that. If you're inciting violence, you're inciting violence, and that's wrong. But then there's going back to the concept about fact-checking, right? Sometimes I find that quote-unquote fact-checking, obviously there's things out there where somebody just says something that is completely factually incorrect. But then there's times when people are, when I see, posts or videos or something, people just saying like, well, this has been presented one way. I kind of think that we should be questioning X, Y, and Z, and that's not a bad thing. Like, I have the capacity to critically think and understand whether or not somebody's point of view is right or wrong or merits, but if we don't have dissenting points of view, how do we ever come up with good public policy? How do we, in a pluralistic country like Canada, incorporate the voices of different regions in this country, the lived experience of different diverse communities in our country? If we only stay on one homogenous line, then how will we ever address some of these issues? And that's what I worry about when I see media organizations and social media organizations fact-checking something, because more often than not, it's not necessarily fact-checking, it's bias confirmation on a certain line of thought. It's not the case all the time, but it's dangerous territory. The other thing is, I think that infantilizes the audience, and it abdicates the audience's responsibility to critically think. Each and every single one of you on this feed have the responsibility to critically think about what you're hearing on any social media post, and you should be saying, do I agree with this? Why is this person presenting it this way? What do I think about? What do I think about this? Is there an alternative point of view? That's critical thinking. That's each and every one of our responsibility, and we're not going to agree all of the time. But public policy making, the art of it is actually to take diverse opinions and try and come up with the best policy option possible. Sometimes, legislators, I'm in the opposition. I'm going to frequently take an opposing viewpoint to the government, especially when it's in the detrimental interest to my community. If there's no room or willingness for that viewpoint to be heard, then I have to continue just ramming it against the wall until somebody finally listens. Wouldn't it be better if we just decided to say that everybody had the capacity to critically think, and maybe people had an opposing viewpoint? It's why I will say frequently when I'm talking about the energy sector, I understand that we need to address the issue of climate change. I don't agree that it has to be at the expense of every single worker in the energy sector in my community, or that the Alberta energy sector should be shut down. That is acknowledging a contrasting point of view and asking how can we move forward given an operating reality. So when media organizations and social media platforms now are putting forward fact checks, who is determining that truth? Is it them? So at the end of the day, I think that you as the user still have the ability to determine whether or not you want to use a social media platform. Some will say, well, everybody's on a platform, and if you're not on it, then your voice is silenced. That's an interesting point of view too. But I don't think that we should just be accepting at face value that certain mainstream media outlets, or any media outlet, or anybody on social media, or a social media platform is a singular arbiter of truth. That's a problem, and that's what leads to bad public policy. Now, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on this issue. As always, don't hesitate to leave things in the content or in the comments. But this is an area of policy that everybody should be concerned about, regardless of your political stripe. Because as we consume information differently, the boundaries around free speech and how we think and how we critically think also have adjusted. Working hard for you. Have a great day.